All right, it's recording. What's up? Welcome to the podcast. I'm
Thanks, man.
gonna do too big of an introduction because it's not super formal. Just explain a little bit about yourself, what praxis is, like what the program that we're doing is, and uh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm Jaime. I know you from Praxis. Right now, I'm really changing my mindset on a lot of like limiting beliefs and breaking down a lot of mental and emotional barriers that I've had. And Praxis has really been helping me do that because it's such a, I mean, as a business pro, it teaches you business, how to manage, like be an entrepreneur and gives you the ins and outs with that. And it provides a really strong community and they're really welcoming and encouraging. And I think because I'm a pretty like I have difficulty with socializing, and so that really helps me like learn to socialize, develop those skills, and then feel comforted and kind of like respected and welcomed. And especially because it's people who are passionate. And I think maybe it's not even that I'm bad at socializing; it's just the people that I've tried to socialize with is just not like the people from Praxis who are so driven and inspired and like passionate about what they do. And that really rubs off on you. But yeah, it teaches you communication skills, how to present yourself, how to build your own brand, how to create value in like today's economy. And I feel like it just teaches you how to create value in life because building a business, it can be attained to anything, you know, creating value physically, spiritually, with relationships with people. So pretty much just teaching you how to do life a little bit and providing a good community for that. But they call it business. Like
Yeah,
they call it teaching you how to do business. But yeah.
it's teaching college. They say college teaches you how to like get a job and succeed. This does the exact same thing, but in a fourth the amount of time, or
Yeah.
even less than that. And it's like it provides a really strong. I think a cool thing about praxis is it's moving into the it really found a niche with like coronavirus because everyone's like, why would I go to college if I'm just going to be on Zoom
Yeah.
calls and lectures? And they're like, hey, we already have the infrastructure set up because we've been creating this alternative to college for like 6, 8 years. I don't know how long they've been around. And they're like, come join us. We're like way cheaper. We'll get you a job faster. And it's like it's hard not to like be confident in going to college after you like understand that there's other alternatives that are just as valuable if you can open your mind up to them and realize that they actually are real and not a scam.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that I'm starting to notice with that as well is it's so action focused. It's sort of like you could read a million books on how to play baseball or how to do jujitsu or how to do boxing, but you're gonna suck. Like as soon as you get in the ring and you put those gloves on, you're gonna be lost. I mean, you
Yeah,
might have like the technical skills, but your coordination just isn't gonna be there. And I feel like praxis sort of combines like the knowledge with the really action based, like immersive approach, which I feel like the best way to learn. That's how you learn. It's the most emotional connection. It's the most real thing that you have. Like it's really how the dynamics and the systems work.
yeah,
And it's also a lot easier than you think once you put yourself out there. Once you start taking, I'm sure that like you run into difficulties, but difficulties in real life, like they have steps you can take to solve them versus the difficulties in your head where it's circumstances that don't even exist. You know, you can't really do nothing about that.
yeah. I think praxis was like it's not like an extremely hard program. It's just like especially like now that I'm like in an apprenticeship in an actual job, I felt like I've grown 10 times as much as I did like 10 times as fast as in praxis because it like pushes you. And praxis just kind of gets you to that step where you're like, all right, I'm ready to like start a job and challenge myself. Most people are not at that step, and they would if they would get put in a job through praxis, if they didn't have any experience, they would just totally tank because they don't have like the mental capacity to like think like I don't really know. It's like But I mean, going on to that like action oriented idea, I think why get an there was like I think one of the praxis ideas is that why would you get an MBA if you can like learn the things way faster by going into a job and learning from the actual business world rather than theorizing about different economic concepts and like just get a job and learn it from what's actually going on and from the real world.
Yeah, and I mean, college is like college. I feel like is really starting to not mean anything anymore,
Yeah,
especially for I mean for certain career paths like that require master degrees and bachelor degrees. Yeah, but for things that you can just like prove, like a business, you can build it without a college degree. You just have to like have a product that people like and being able how like know how to navigate that. You don't need a degree for that.
yeah,
And I feel like especially now people are starting to realize that and they just want experience. People want like if you wanted someone who worked for you, like if someone who was performing your surgery, you know, and they're like, yeah, I did like 10 years of school, but I haven't performed on anybody yet. You would be like, no, like of course not, versus someone who has only been like 5 years of school or something like that and has like operated on hundreds of people, someone who has the experience. And that's why I think praxis, it provides more value in that it gives you, you just know how to do it.
yeah,
It's not you think you know how to do it or you're told you know how to do it. Like you've shown you know how to do it.
yeah, exactly. I mean, me and you are probably really convinced of the idea because we're actually in the program. I would just
Yeah.
say anyone that's listening, I could put the link in the description. It's just if you want to learn more. I'm not trying to diverge too much. I think our main topics are slightly different from business and praxis.
Yeah.
So I say we dive into the real deep stuff if you want to.
Oh, definitely for sure, man.
Let's do it. So we got the list pulled up here. Um, let's talk dive in a little bit into Buddhism. So uh, let's see. We could go quality of life over quantity. Let's start with that idea. So,
Yeah.
what do you mean by quality of life? Are you because like quality of life being like I want I mean sorry quantity like quantity of life being I want to get the most material possessions, the most money as I possibly can, and then quality of life is like a life based on well-being and happiness and peace. And why should we approach a life of quality or like why does pursuing a life of quantity lead to a, a life with low quality and with low well-being?
Yeah. I think a quote by the Dalai Lama, I don't know if I'm gonna get it right, captures it perfectly, but it's something along the lines of like man gives up his health for money
Yeah,
and then tries to use the money to buy back his health. And I don't think material possessions and even living a long life and a healthy life, like of course I don't think anybody would argue that that's bad, like financial security and stuff. I wouldn't argue that that's bad, but that's not gonna, if that's your only priority, that's not gonna fill the gap. That's not an end in itself. That's only an instrument to get to well-being. And it's sort of like I'm sure it's shown in third world countries where people are just so free and I mean, there's definitely struggles, but and in tribes and like certain groups of people that do not have the financial um, resource or even the resources that we have now, like this abundance of resources, they're happier because they're focused on like what's important. There's this community, there's this family, there's this they're directly connected to the food they eat. They're directly connected to the work that they do. They are important to their community. They're important to their family. And now I feel like we're just so focused on like just abstract stuff like money and status and stuff like that versus just really connecting and feeling just focusing on the like happiness aspect of it and seeing ourselves as animals as well instead of just like these machines built for productivity, you know? like just allowing ourselves to be like the kids that we naturally are, you know, like kids.
Yeah, taking that
Yeah.
taking that playful attitude toward life, like life should be fun and should be like it shouldn't be a game where you shouldn't make your only goal of life to be to get as much money as possible because money does not equal happiness, as most of us probably know from trying to buy stuff to make us happy. I think one of the most interesting points I've heard on that topic is you look at the stories of people who travel the world travelers, and they say that everyone I've heard a recurring theme that everyone that like goes to like India or like the slums of like whatever
Hmm.
country, they're like, I can't believe how happy they were, happier than
Yeah.
the vast majority of people in America, and they're living on like $1 a day, yet they're like ecstatic, and like that just shows you that material possessions have no correlation with happiness. If anything, I would say a negative correlation. I would say the more you get, the more miserable you are, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, I guess, especially from a Buddhist perspective and like the Four Noble Truths, how attachment is suffering. I think like if you were able to have a lot of material possessions and not be attached to them, then I feel like there's like you would just be just as happy as someone who doesn't have to worry about the material possessions. But that's harder to do because if you're just used to sleeping on the floor, like a dirt floor with a straw pillow, then it's a lot easier to stay on the floor with a straw pillow than for someone who's used to sleeping on like Tempur-Pedic beds, you know,
Yeah.
or sleep number beds. And so that's where I think it's just the attachment aspect of it. And that's sort of like the new, I feel like, uh, trend now is minimalism and then simplifying things. And that's what I think with Buddhism. And you look at monks, and that's why I know you wanted to be a monk, and that's why I wanted to be a monk as well,
Yeah,
because you just really focus and double down. Like once you get rid of everything, then you see what's like really important.
for
And
sure.
that's where I think that's what's attracted to me. And then that's what I think monks and stuff like that and people who have less of one thing, but they still have more of another thing. Because I feel like now you look at people who are poor in certain areas, I'm sure they're miserable because they don't have a community. They're isolated from people. They're struggling to work. I don't think that kind of poor is happy, but the poor where they're living as a very tight knit family who's very connected, everyone's working to help each other, and they're strong ethics and they have like strong belief systems, then I think that's what really ties it in together. Because even going along with people who live in poor areas, like this guy I used to work with doing fences, repairing fences, like the stories he would tell me was just like, God damn, dude, like I cannot imagine that. Because he grew up in Mexico on a farm and they were really poor. Like he was talking about he would go days without eating, and he had like the typical thing where you'd have to you go he said he went like you go days without water, like a day or two without water out of the week. He was super skinny, malnourished, and his uncles try to like kill him. Like they would tell him to run and shoot at him, and they would beat him. And I was like, Jesus Christ. So it's like that kind of poor is not happy. But the Buddhism and certain Buddhist ethics, I think when taken into the right frame of mind and really focus less on the dogma and more on the experience, I think that's where the most happiness um, comes from.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really throw I think it'd be a mistake to throw a blanket statement over everything and say everyone that's poor is happy because that's definitely not
Yeah,
true. It's just
yeah,
that, like, I think the idea is that just because you have money doesn't mean that you are happy, and just because you're poor doesn't mean you're unhappy. And obviously, there's cases of the opposite in either way. But I think that, yeah, that idea of like non-attachment is really central to Buddhism, and it's a core It's what can cause a lot of suffering if you have a lot of attachment, and if you learn how to live in a really detached way, that could bring a lot of happiness. And I kind of, when you started talking at the end about like dogma in Buddhism and how like not following like, I don't know, I wanted to expand on that a little bit more because no matter what religion you're in, you can fall into like different belief systems and different like dogmatic positions within them. Like if it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, like they all have their fair share of dogma. And like how, so you said you wanted to become a monk at one point in time, but like, and that's kind of like a single like pointed approach. Like I want to like commit myself to like, maybe not for the rest of my life, but I want to like commit to this technique, this school, and then I just want to like go really deep rather than just being spread thin on whatever. How,
Mm.
now you said your approaches have changed a little bit, where like you're trying to see the value in multiple perspectives, not religion and spiritual especially, but also like any other field that you want. Could you explain like what made you switch from like I want to like become a monk and go all the way down this path of Buddhism to like I want to see the value of multiple different spiritual traditions and whatever other field that you're interested in at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I still think the monasteries that I went to was like a really nice place that I would still want to go
Yeah,
and even maybe ordain one day. But I just realized my motives behind it were corrupt because, again, talking about my trouble socializing, I feel like I sort of was trying to use that as a spiritual bypass, as like, I just won't deal with my problems. And as long as I go here, everything will be fixed. Like the problems will come up, but I'll just meditate them away. And I had it under this pretty disguise of like, no, like I want to practice spirituality and I want to deepen my practice and I want to do this. But it was really just like I just want to get away from my problems and I just want to like this. I'll get high off of this pretty much. Like this will be my new drug. And realizing that, I sort of realized my motives were corrupt, and I was like, okay, well, let me develop myself and let me fix the let me just work on myself. And if I get to a point where I'm comfortable and I'm sort of like, yeah, like I want to ordain and that sounds like a good idea. And there's not this pressure like someone's chasing me and I'm like, oh, I gotta run to the monastery. If I'm just like, oh, like if I'm pulled towards it, then yeah, definitely. But right now, I just feel like I gotta work on certain aspects of myself. But I think what's most important is just the community. And in Buddhism, I noticed, especially for me, I sort of try to use this as a spiritual bypass for myself. Is like this concept of detachment, right? Is like you can just become detached from everything and this enlightenment, complete detachment and stuff. But I really started questioning that and breaking that down because I feel like that's impossible for a human being, like maybe under limited, like very special circumstances. But for a functional human being, I just feel like complete detachment's not possible. And I've even seen in Buddhists, like there's this thing of like, oh well, obviously when you're enlightened, you would still drink water and have food, but that's not really an attachment. Like that's just, but it is. It like if you were completely detached, then it's sort of like, why would you even want to do that? You know, what would be wrong with just sitting there and just disappearing into nothing? And then we would never hear of you. And so that's where I'm sort of like, well, no, even these people have values. And I think it's just the level of detachment. I'm sure they're not attached to like, oh, I have to make everybody in the whole world like beautiful and amazing. And I have to solve all the world's problems and have everybody love me. I'm sure it's more of a stoic, like, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to help people. I'm going to try and do this. So it's just, I feel like they're just shifting or limiting their attachment, but I don't think there's really any real annihilation. And that concept was really harmful to me because, and I'm sure for maybe other people trying to use it as a spiritual bypass, like I'll just become detached and I won't deal with like the crying baby that I don't want to tend to, you know? It's
yeah,
like, no, you tend to the baby and you tend to your life, and you care for yourself and you care for others. And Thich Nhat Hanh, I think, because I sort of stepped away from him, and I was like, because I was getting really interested in like what do the scriptures say? What is like, why aren't you quoting like the Abhidharma, and why aren't you quoting these scriptures in these texts? And then now I'm starting to look back and like, no, he's he's a lot more human than that, and it's a lot more emotional and a lot more. It's just emotional. I feel like that's what's the main thing is it's connecting to our humanness and not like what Ram Dass says. You have to remember your Buddha nature and remember like your social security number. Like there's just we're humans, and that's just what it comes. And it's hard to be human, and it's confusing, but that doesn't. It's still beautiful, and we shouldn't like. No, human life is disgusting, and detach it and get away from it. And so that's where I think I'm starting to shift in my perspective. I still believe in Buddhism, and I think it's very like logical and the things make a lot of sense. But where I'm starting to shift my beliefs of, I guess, the purpose of it and like the utility and how to use it in my life.
Yeah, I think it's in any spiritual community, like especially Buddhism, there's a lot. I like that idea, the word you threw out, spiritual bypassing, or two words.
Mm,
Like, I think that happens a lot more than people realize because it's hard to detect it. So when spirituality is framed as like Buddhism, this practice will help you achieve peace, bliss, inner fulfillment, whatever. This is people that have like internal problems or suffering, they have like this strong shadow. They're like, oh, this is the answer to all my problems. All I have to do is meditate and I can just meditate everything away. Obviously,
yeah.
that's not true. And I think what I've been thinking about a lot recently is, all right, what does that actually mean? How do you like implement? How do I actually face my problems? What does it look like to go into my my psyche, like dive deep into my emotions and see what's actually causing me all this suffering and all this pain?
Mm,
And I'm starting to realize that a lot of stuff can't be solved by meditation. Meditation helps you achieve different levels of understanding beyond the mind, some really deep levels of understanding that most people don't even think exist in the first place. So like there's a lot of value in it, but there's also a lot that's other that you can learn that's other than the Buddhism and meditation. Like Buddhism is a partial worldview, just like every other worldview. Like I've not found a single worldview that like encompasses everything. I found ones that try, and I'm really interested in some of those. But I still
mm.
know like deep down, there's no like tradition that can encompass it all. So you kind of have to take that approach of, all right, I'm gonna find what's valuable in this one, find what's valuable in that one, find what's valuable in this one. I think, um, I lost my train of thought. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. It was reminding me of because I just started getting into David Hume. I just started reading some of his stuff, and there's this concept that he has like you can't derive like what ought to be from what is. So it's sort of like you can't. So like the Buddhists like say three marks of existence or the four noble truths. It's hard to say like life is impermanent and life is suffering. You can't derive like action, like a concrete way of action or opinion about. I guess you can't derive an opinion of it. Like no opinion is going to be true. Just the only thing you know is like what it is. Yeah, no, this is falling apart. I gotta I gotta develop my understanding of this more. But
Yeah, I think I didn't. I've never really read any. I want to dive into some of those philosophers like David Hume, Nietzsche,
mm,
all those stuff because I feel like those are really valuable perspectives. I typically have only focused on Eastern perspectives, so I was focused on Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, how they relate to each other, how the different mystical traditions around the world, Christianity, Judaism, how they all fit together. But I've never really read like Western philosophy, and I think that there I have heard of some similarities between them. Like there obviously have a lot of differences too, but like have you delved into like Nietzsche or like any of these Western philosophers? Like how do you frame their ideas with Buddhism, and how do you like see how they relate and how they both impact your life?
Yeah. Well, David Hume is the philosopher I'm most interested in right now. And from what I've read so far and what I've heard so far, is his teachings like really strongly aligned with the Buddhist perspectives. And he has this thing called the bundle theory, which sort of goes into like the different consciousnesses and the skandhas and like the notion of not self in Buddhism, which is one of the three marks of existence. So that's pretty much like anything that exists is not self.
Yeah.
And so what the bundle theory states is that like an object is only comprised of things that are other than that object. So like an apple is just about like its roundness, its redness, its taste, but those things are not don't make an apple. Like if something's round, then it's not an apple. If something's red, then it's not an apple. It's made of things that are other than the apple. So there's no really essence of an apple. It's just a bunch of like other things. And that Thich Nhat Hanh framed this a really powerful way. And especially with his voice, man, it just hits you. But he was talking about how, like, especially in a human being, what he uses is a piece of paper. Like you see the whole cosmos in a piece of paper, and the logic behind that is that the paper comes from a tree. The tree is connected to the ground, so you have the ground. It takes in energy from the sun, so it needs the sun. It takes in water, and without any of these things that are other than the tree would not be able to exist. So there's no like essence to the tree. It's just based on everything outside of it. And then with humans and like our notion of self, that's really interesting as well, because it's sort of like I have this identity, like I'm me. And it's really not. I'm my ancestral background. I'm part of my mother. I'm part of my father. They shaped me in ways that I can't deny, like it would be illogical to deny. I have to take in water. I have to take in like the sun. It's just things other than myself that I call Jaime, but there's really no Jaime to anything. Like there's nothing I don't call the sun Jaime. I don't call my mom Jaime. I don't call my dad Jaime. And so oh yeah, I totally got sidetracked. But so that's the bundle theory and how that relates to interdependence. But he also focuses on the human experience. And that's where I think Buddhism, because Buddhism is not, you're not focused on God. There's no gods. There's no metaphysics. It sort of strips that away. And it's like, no, like there's suffering. And like, that's just the main problem. That's like the whole thing is there's pain. How do we get away from it? And that's even what David Hume was talking about. What's interesting is that reason is the slave of passions, I think is to quote him. I don't know if that's a direct quote, but reason is only the slave of passions. And usually we have this thing, it's like, no, we have to control our desires by reason, where he argues that it's the other way around, that our reasoning is controlled by our passions. And I would say I agree with that, because like our pain is the most real thing that we know. Like a lot, like everybody knows how to, like what to do to meditate, or to take the steps to take to begin to meditate, or the intellectual, the facts why you should work out, the facts why you should read books, the facts why you should do these things. But there's not that emotional impact. The emotional impact of watching Netflix is a lot stronger. So you can reason like, no, I'll do that tomorrow, or I'll do this. Your reasoning is the slave to your passion to watch, to find pleasure. And so I agree with that too. And that's really interesting as well. And I think for me, it helps me learn and to accept my humanness and my emotions instead of trying to intellectualize and reason everything. It's sort of like taking it back to like, how does this make me feel? You know, like how do I want to feel? How can I get to feel this way? And I think that's very separate from hedonism, because I think there's big pitfalls in hedonism and, like, again, attachments that create suffering. And in my experience, the most peaceful moments are when it's just simple stuff, you know, it's just like laying down next to somebody who you really care about, or it's just that one, like when you're sipping that cup of tea and there's just no thoughts in your mind. And then after the thoughts are come flooding and you're like, oh, like, that was nice. Like I just felt relaxed for that one moment. And so I think it's really sort of embracing my humanness and not being this analytical computer of like facts and how do I do this, and really focusing on like how do I feel better and how do I create a happier, healthier version of myself. What about you? How has the Eastern traditions impacted your life?
I think they've impacted my life in like more ways than I can like fathom, and I'm
Mm,
really trying to understand because I'm always trying to implement them, and I'm always like implementing certain specific ideas, and I'm really struggling recently. I'm like, how do I conceptualize like the entirety of how they've impacted me and what I've learned from them and how they've shaped my worldview. Um,
mm,
I don't know. I think they've just made me realize that science and rationality aren't everything. I think that's probably the main one is realizing that why just because I was born into a world where science is the main worldview, why does that mean that I have to like disagree with all these other positions that don't align with the scientific worldview? And like, it doesn't mean that I don't like think that science is valuable. It just means that like taking a strictly rational, logical approach to everything in your life is not the best way to do things. And I think that's what causes a lot of suffering is just trying to rationalize the hell out of everything. And like, how can I become happy? Oh, let's find some let's find some logical conclusion to happiness. And what if like happiness is, I can only find it through looking into my emotions rather than my mind and my brain and like whatever all these like physical material things. A couple thoughts I had on the last stuff you're talking about. You touched on a point about how emotions or passion create our thoughts or rationality, and
uh,
rather than or like how those are sometimes more powerful than any rationality, like any like logical conclusion we can come up with. Like we can think, everyone knows it's like eating salads every day is healthy or like working out is good to do, but not very many people act on it because you don't get that same amount, like because of hedonism, basically. And so a
yeah,
couple thoughts I had on that is the Buddhist idea of like acceptance. So like, I think that acceptance is the opposite of hedonism because hedonism is always trying to get away from whatever you're experiencing. So Buddhists say that like life is suffering, the Buddhist path will help you not suffer. And hedonism says life is suffering, let's not suffer. So let's do anything we can to feel pleasure in this moment because life is suffering. And so like I think that hedonism in its essence is just a way to it's just a rationalization to get away from pain. So anytime you feel pain, it's like, all right, let's do something pleasurable. And that's like not the best thing for you long term because you do that over periods of years and years, and then you end up somewhere like true growth requires some sort of pain. And
yeah,
I really struggle to understand what in Buddhism suffering really means because like obviously you want to like embrace pain because it helps you grow, but what would they consider suffering? I think for me suffering is just unnecessary pain. So there's like the pains that you go through in life that are like necessary, but when you're just stressing like ruminating over something in the past or thinking about some imaginary scenario that you have no clue is going to actually happen in the future, but you're just like so worried about it that you just suffer because of it. So I think that to kind of limit some of that suffering, the Buddhist way that I think is really valuable is acceptance. So whatever you're feeling right now, that's all right. It doesn't. There's nothing wrong with how you're feeling. Just accept it. Don't see it as wrong. Don't see yourself as incomplete because you haven't reached some future goal. And I think another idea I had on that point, that emotions create thoughts rather than the other way around, or like I I found this really cool idea by David Hawkins. He talks about it in his book Letting Go, where basically he says that all our thoughts are derived from our emotions. So basically, he's like, uh, if you're like thinking really negative thoughts, it's because you had some emotion rise up, and that it just like caused you to think negative thoughts to like justify that emotion. Or I don't know. I'm trying to understand it fuller, but basically, he says that no matter what you're thinking, just dive into your emotions. So like you're thinking some like whatever you're thinking. How was it phrased? I'm trying to remember how it was phrased, but basically like the easiest way, and I found this is really powerful too. The easiest way to be present and to be mindful in this moment is just to realize, is to have acceptance and to let go of your thoughts. So like that's not an easy thing to do, but like, all right, a lot of times my thoughts are perpetuated by me thinking that I have to get away from like this suffering. If I just accept exactly what I'm feeling right now, and I just dive into the whatever emotional state I'm in, it helps a
Mm.
lot to be really present, to be really um, here and now, rather than trying to rationalize why I feel this way, or like this is kind of what your mind does subconsciously. You don't know that it's happening, but a lot of your thoughts, like worry, like related to worry, or like ruminating about the past or anything, that's a lot caused by just we're suffering inside and we're trying to like ruminate why we're suffering. Um,
Yeah.
I don't really know where I was going there. That's just a couple thoughts I had.
No, yeah, I think that's valuable. And I think definitely the acceptance and learning how to be present is the very valuable for us and I think that why that is because like anything that's going to happen is going to happen. It's happening right now, you know, like any happiness that's to be had is going to be right now. And there's this stoic, and it's pretty logical, at least. Well, I think it's completely logical, at least experientially. I mean, I don't know, according to quantum physics or like the theory of time and stuff like that. Like yeah. But in the book I'm reading, Meditations, what Marcus Aurelius says is sort of like your life only happens in a moment. Like you only experience your life as a moment. Like right now is your whole life that you're experiencing. And this was sort of freaked me out when I started thinking about this. I was like, oh man. And it makes sense, is because like your whole life is going to be the moment, like the moment when you die, it's only a moment away, like on an experiential level, because eventually you're going to be there and it's just going to be like a moment. You're going to be like, oh, like this is the moment now. And this is when I'm going to die. And really being able to focus and bring that in. Of course, there's going to be pain, but it's actionable now. You can do things to relieve it. It's right in front of you. It's not like, oh, there's going to be pain next Tuesday. He's coming. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's like, no, he's right in front of you. And you can, okay, how can I figure this out? How can I do this? And I think what really helps me and what has helped me kind of step into that, because I had this perception of acceptance is it's sort of like going to shake someone's hand and then like just having like a gun behind your back or like a knife, you know, like, oh, as soon as he grabs on, I'm going to stab him or I'm going to shoot him. And that's what I would do with my emotions. It's like, oh, I'm going to accept you. But then like, as soon as I can, I'm going to like just shoot you in the face. And so it's really just like turning like you were saying, like turning it, like not running away anymore and flipping the script I think what really helped me do that, when I really figured out, and like was sort of like a aha click kind of moment, is just asking questions. And so and I noticed this, even if I'm like, because death is a scary thing, and I'm like, oh my God, the moment, like I'm gonna die, and that's gonna be the last moment of my life, and then coming. And if I just ask myself, like, what if that's not a bad thing? Or what if I have a beautiful death? Or what if that's actually like what makes life so beautiful? Or any with pain or something, if there's a lot of fear, it's like, what if this is not as bad as I think it is? Or what if like I can hold this with compassion? And then it really gives you the control and the power, and it like influences your emotion, because then you're like, huh, like how would it feel if this was a beautiful moment? And then you sort of feel like the tension release in your throat and release in your stomach. And like, this actually feels good. I'd much rather consider this a beautiful moment, regardless of what it actually will be or what it actually is. Like, it just feels better. And I don't see any reason why it couldn't be. And it also allows room, I think, as a question for, again, giving you the power. And it's not a concrete statement. It's like there is no pain, and I will hold this with compassion, because you might not be able to. It might be really hard. It might be really difficult emotion. And so, but if you ask the question, it's not forcing you. It's not imposing it on you. You're like, well, nah, not right now. I can't really do it right now. Versus it's like commanding you. And so that's what I found really helpful for me, is in turning around and getting to the moment. And also, even with the meditation, I think there's a bunch of different things. And like, there's this um like brand of meditation, like of mindful, or like breathing, like mindfulness of breathing and doing all these things. But I think whatever brings you into the present moment is perfect. It's meditation. If you enjoy cooking, that's your meditation. If you enjoy riding a bike, that's your meditation. If you're like feeling the wind as it goes against you, feeling your feet on the pedals, and you're just completing that moment, that's the same thing that the person who's sitting down and closing their eyes is doing with their body.
Yeah, they say a big trap in meditation is thinking that you can only be present while you're on the meditation cushion and seeing like
Yeah.
the spiritual practice only as that. And in reality, your entire life is the practice, and like no matter what action you're doing, that is spiritual. And like realizing that and having that shift between I can only be present on the meditation cushion and my entire life is spiritual, and like, and
Mm.
why can't I just have mindfulness throughout the entire day? Like that's a huge shift, and most people don't like really realize that they're even doing making that distinction between on the cushion and off the cushion, when in reality everything is it. Um,
Mm.
yeah, no, I really agree. Oh, frick. What did you talk about before? I had a couple ideas pop up, but now I just gotta like write them down or something. Um,
Yeah, well, let me know if the ideas come to you. Do you have them? Are
no,
they at the tip of your tongue now? Um, it sort of reminded me of David Hume again, and it just clicked in my head about the what ought. You can't derive what ought to be from what is. So, and that's perfectly represented in our perceptions. And I think that perfectly takes on like just take example, like death or something like that. Like if you were to take sort of a nihilistic approach, and like it doesn't matter what you do now, you're gonna die, it's all gonna end anyway. That's valid. That's 100% valid. But if you also say, but what if you work really hard and create a beautiful life? Like what if death makes life beautiful? What if death makes life worth it? Because it's like you would have to attain something that you're willing to lose, and that makes it something really beautiful. That's also 100% valid. And I think that's where the David Hume what ought is sort of comes from, is because it's like there's this fact, like you're gonna die or there's death, and then a million ways you can interpret that, and all of them are valid. And so that's where like you can't derive what ought from what is, because there's so many oughts and they're all valid, but that's not from like what is. And so that's why I think it just relates back to like what's going to create the most like peaceful and happy life. And I would argue that like peace, and I'm sure peace looks different different people. But like doing a lot of drugs and having all these, like maybe a bunch of relationships and stuff like that, like there's I'm sure there's really high bursts of pleasure, but it's a lot of stress to keep up all that stuff and to keep pursuing, and it's a lot of stress on your body and your mind,
Yeah.
versus peace, where it's just like, it's just nourishing. It's not like a donut where it's really high but it takes such a toll on your body. It's like eating quinoa. Like if you learn to enjoy, or even salad, if you learn to enjoy salad, then like not only does it taste good, but it feels good after the fact, versus tasting good and then feeling horrible.
Yeah, I think that's the same idea of delayed pleasure. Like you can have as much pleasure as you want right now, and then it's just going to lead to more pain down the road. You can have pain now, and like you can create a really beautiful life where you're just like you wake up and you're content because you went through all the hours of suffering to get there, I guess.
Mm.
And I think there's a quote that backs that. It's like um, easy choices, hard life. Hard choices
Oh
equal
yeah.
life. The best summary of it. But I really like that idea of becoming friends with death, because I think that's a hugely stoic practice. There's a couple practices in stoicism that talk about making death your friend, and there's a lot of visualization. So like one of the practices is imagine everyone you love dying, feel that
Mm.
feel that emotion and feel that pain, and then once you come out at the end of the practice, you'll be that much more grateful for everyone
Yeah.
life still being there, you know. I've tried that a couple times and actually like cried doing it, and I was like, damn, this actually works. Like then it makes you that much more happy that they are there and that they're not dead. That's like kind of the point of it, you know.
Yeah.
And and then another point that you made was um like you can see death as like in a nihilistic perspective, or you can see it in like a reason to be grateful, because that means that I only have like I think what I took from that is it's all about perspective. No matter what perspective you take, it's gonna be the way that you see the world. Like why would you take a super negative perspective if like that's just gonna make your life more negative and it's gonna make your life
Yeah.
worse. Well, so like um you can see the same fact in multiple different ways, and that's like the problem with like science and stuff. Like science tries to get to the facts, but like say you have one hard fact,
Yeah.
you can have multiple different perspectives on that fact. So just take like the fact of like we're all gonna die. Some people will say use that to prove nihilism, and they say all right, nothing matters. And then some people will say we're all gonna die, so that means that my time here on earth is that much more valuable, and that makes me appreciate it that much more. And yeah, well, I wanted to dive into so what are your perspectives, what are your ideas on a dead or alive universe? Because like this is one I've been really diving into lately.
Mm.
And so you got like I think the main question is how can dead things create life? And um I don't know, you can riff on that. I have some ideas, whatever. I'll let you go ahead first, and I'm gonna turn the mic on real quick.
All right.
So I'll let you go ahead. Like, I think one of the, I think this is why I started seeing the limitations of science too, is because science says that dead things created life, and it says that matter somehow formed and coalesced into whatever we're experiencing right now. And a lot of I've read a lot of actually like modern scientists that say science doesn't actually prove that, and like here's why. And like
Mm.
I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I guess it really does go back to David, like the concept that you can't derive what ought to be from what is. And that's a hard concept, because if you apply it to itself, then it's worthless because you can't derive nothing from it. But it goes back to like this science or whatever. No, I don't know where I was going with that, but with like dead material creating live things. Because there is like interesting perspectives, and there's like really opportunistic like neuroscientists who are they're like, no, like we're pretty sure once like we're on the brink of a breakthrough, once we get this thing, we'll be able to understand consciousness, we'll be able to solve the problems of consciousness, how it arises, and stuff like that. And but I think that's still, all that stuff is still worthless if like it doesn't make us happy, you know? It's like, oh yeah, we know, and like, and again, I don't think, say the universe is a dead universe, and we can conceptualize that. There's no dispute. That's what it is, and it's like I wouldn't care if it didn't make me happy. If I'm still experiencing, I'm still feeling, even if it's dead, even if it means something to me, even if it's an illusion. So it's sort of like, even it sort of it almost makes it redundant, or to a point where it's like, but I have the concept of feeling alive. I have this thing of experience, and I want to point that to more happier ways. And if scientists were to discover like, yeah, it's a dead universe, like 100%, but like here's how we can like use this to make you happy, or like here's things that can make you happy, and it, I guess, in some way betters the lives of people, then the universe is dead. But and there's also this interesting thing too that I've heard from on the Duncan Trussell podcast. He says this a lot, but it's sort of like taking that view of having a dead universe can be really harmful, because it's like an ethical bypass, because it's sort of like everything is just a process in the brain, everything is just atoms. So it's like, why not destroy the earth? Why not harm all these living organisms? Why not get billions of dollars while people are starving? Why not just not care about it? And I don't think, even if it was an inanimate, or I don't know, like purely material universe, that knowledge wouldn't do it. There's still like ethics. We're still humans, and we still need to organize our behavior in certain ways, or else we're just gonna go into chaos and die, you know, or else we're not. And I mean, I feel like already with the scientific point of view, we're really disrupting our balance with life. And as like you were talking about earlier, the people who are more in tune with that, who are poor and uneducated, but they have like those communities and those ties and stuff, and they have that balance with nature, they're happier than us, who we're like, well, let's look at the facts and let's consider the science and let's intellectualize everything. And we're sort of forgetting our balance with everything. And if we intellectualize our way into balance, then yeah. If we find our way into balance ignorantly, then I just feel like as long as we find that balance. But going back to the concept of a dead or alive universe, that's, I wouldn't really know how to answer. There's an interesting perspective I've heard from Alan Watts where he talks about seeing it in the reverse, as how like say per se a rock or something like that. And I think Sam Harris's wife wrote a book on this, how we perceive consciousness and stuff. But say like a rock, Alan Watts' argument is that like, no, we're really complex. We have really complex consciousness, and a rock is just simple consciousness. I guess just a simple form of consciousness, but it's still consciousness. And we're just really complex. It's not like the rock is unconscious or inanimate and we're animate. It's no, the rock is just a really simple form of animate, and we're just a more complicated form of animate. And Sam Harris's wife sort of goes into that too, and talking about how, like, why are we thinking that plants are inanimate? Like, we don't really care or have ethics for plants. At least I haven't really noticed a strong ethic with anybody I've talked to. Like, yeah, save the animals and all this stuff is important, but nobody's really like,
Save
I
the
mean, for trees maybe, yeah, but it's more for the rest of the plant. It's not like you think when you're cutting down a tree, if like a dog was, or an animal was getting cut, you know,
yeah,
chopped with an axe, you wouldn't feel the same. But they're talking about, it's like, just because that, like, it's still a living organism, but just because it doesn't move, we're assuming that it's like less conscious or less intelligent than us. even though we're moving, like we're moving organisms. So we have to like see things in a certain way. Whereas a tree might be just as conscious as us, but since it's evolved in a way that it doesn't have to move around, it's like just seeing things from a different perspective pretty much, but it's still a perspective that's just as complex or as conscious as ours.
Yeah,
But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I've heard that idea too. I think it's called like the technical idea behind it is like panpsychism. So
Mm,
panpsychism basically says everything's alive. And so like,
yeah.
but I think I don't know if I like completely agree with panpsychism, but I think that I've read a couple articles on how people that believe on panpsychism are react differently to like protecting the environment than people that don't. Because if you see everything as alive, you're like, all right, I'm gonna protect it. I'm gonna see like I'm not gonna destroy my environment because like I don't believe that everything's like just made of inanimate molecules. Once you like take a different perspective, it gives you more compassion and care for the world around you, and not just ego overall. I need as much money as possible at the expense of everything else. I think the best argument I've heard that says like I don't know, maybe this is slightly different. I don't think this is like the animate inanimate idea, but it kind of relates to it. It says like why everything isn't material. So the Western worldview is that everything is external to us. There's a desk right here. There's like a book. There's a door. Like those things are real and they're physical. The argument
Yeah.
the argument against that is like how do I explain it? So we say, has anyone ever experienced an object outside of their perception?
Yeah. No.
Everyone, the only thing anyone can ever experience is whatever like is their perception of something. And
Yeah.
so there's a couple ways you can approach that is like, so how do we know that something exists? And how do we know? So like this is like one of the things that I'm like, it really intrigues me. It's like qualia or phenomenology. The idea that like, all right, I see the color blue. How do I know that my blue isn't your red? But we just agreed on the word blue. So like, so we're seeing completely different things, but that's
Mm,
all we've ever known. And people told us that's what the name of it is. And so like, that's what, like, I think that's a really interesting like thought experiment to have. But then another way to approach it is all we can ever see is perception, or all we ever know is our perception of things, our subjective experience. I can't know what you're experiencing. I can't know if this physical object exists outside of my perception. And then we also perceive neurons, and to say that what we perceive creates perception itself. I don't know if that made any sense whatsoever. I just realized after I said it that, but I don't know. There's this book I read by this scientist. He's like a psychologist. He's like no, he's a cognitive scientist. His name is
mm,
um. I'm gonna find it real quick because I can't remember. But um, he basically said that like nothing is like physical, but he says when there he says all we experience is perception. So like he says
yeah.
when you look away from an object, is it still there? Most people would say yes. He would say no, because he says when I look away from an object, it ceases to exist, and like
Yeah.
something's there, and like I can still feel something, but all I can experience is my perception of it. So I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense because I realized that it makes a lot of sense in my mind. And then when I try to explain it, it kind of falls apart, you know. And I think that means I need to work on my ideas more and like develop them more so that I can actually so I don't have these faults in like how I explain things, you know.
No, no, I think that made sense. I think it's sort of like, I guess it's not an I don't think it's an argument of objectivity or like continuation. I guess you'd have to get more into like I feel like especially an argument like that, quantum theory and like is the object still there? Like, I mean, you feel you'd have to like consider physics and stuff like that. But I feel like the idea of it, if it's still there, is redundant. Like, it doesn't matter because everything is in our perception. Anything outside of our perception doesn't matter until it's brought into our perception. Like, if there was a tiger that stalked me on the way home, like every time I left my house, but it never attacked me, it never entered my consciousness, it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't know it existed. I wouldn't even care. And it shouldn't matter because I can't perceive it. It's outside of my control. And that's another thing with David Hume is it's sort of like disregarding the metaphysics. It's like, if it's not based in our subjective experience, then there's no way of us possibly knowing. And there's no reason for us to care. It's beyond our capabilities. It's sort of like you're not gonna, like someone who comes to fix your toilet or something like that, you know, you're not going to try and take over his job if you don't know what you're doing. You just leave it to somebody else. Or it's just, as humans, that's not our job, that's not our thing. And that's where I think, like, yeah, if I look away from an object subjectively, like, there's no possible way of me knowing that it exists. Like, if I turn right now and then someone were to like take my phone away, and then I look back, I'm like, oh my God, it's not there. Because like, I don't know if it's there anymore. I don't know. And it's out of my perception. So that's where I get what you're saying. I guess it's not really an argument of physics or like the positioning of things in space time. It's just more of like, subjectively, it doesn't exist. And that's all we can experience. So that's all that matters, is our subjectivity. And yeah, so does that make sense? Does that add on to it?
Yeah, I think that adds on to it a lot. Like, I think it's such an obvious fact that you just look over because we believe in like external objects exist when we don't perceive them. So like, I mean, this question's been around like forever. Like everyone's heard the idea if a tree falls in the forest doesn't make a sound. That's like the same argument. Like, if does it exist when I don't perceive it, or like is whatever's behind me, if there's something like right behind my head and I just like, you can like the same idea, like maybe that's a little stretching it, but like, how can I don't know. I think it just gets into really epistemological and like metaphysical ideas, and like these are really foundational ideas to how we understand everything and how we shape like our belief system about everything. Most people are like, this is a slightly different like conversation, but most people are like, why would I ever study philosophy? It's like, because if you don't, then you're just gonna be given the default philosophy of your culture, and if you do, you can actually intentionally decide like what you want to believe about things. So like, science gives you a philosophy, believe it or not. People, I've talked to so many people and they're like, oh, science is airy fairy, like, or not science, philosophy is airy fairy. It's all in the mind. It's just armchair philosophers thinking up wild ideas. It's like, but it's not like,
Well, that's an idea in itself. Your idea of philosophy is a philosophy on philosophy.
you lost me
Well, it's just, it's like this mind get, or like you were saying, how you see philosophy as like, it's only armchair stuff, it's only in the mind, it's only these things. That's like a system of thinking. That's an idea regarding philosophy. It's a certain like conceptual framework or way of thinking of philosophy. You're still thinking, and you're utilizing like the same things that a philosopher is using. You're
there. Yeah.
just,
You just
it's
don't
sort
know
of to
that
disregard it. Yeah.
you just don't know that what you're doing is philosophy when you condemn philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it, yeah, what you were saying made a lot of sense about how you kind of result to this default philosophy. And I think that, again, like, if the default philosophy is like a really fulfilling, like life enhancing philosophy, then hell yeah, like give me that. But if you're not satisfied and you're looking for other answers, then that's sort of an indication that like, well, the way you've been taught and the way that we're thinking probably isn't cutting it for us. So that's why we have to look for so many answers and all this, all these ideas and stuff. And so that's where I think it's sort of, now we sort of have to take it into our own hands, because the society that we're in, either the default philosophy or like the piles of philosophy and different ideas and opinions that are dumped on us, we just have to find what makes us happy and enhances our life. And for some people that might be Christianity, for some people that might be like optimism or nihilism, or just whatever philosophy makes you happier.
So would you say like you kind of like you like it sounds like you're
Yeah.
coming from a lot of these ideas from utilitarianism. So like I'm gonna do makes like whatever makes me the most fulfilled in life. That's like the thing that matters the most. And like I think when I think of that idea, the only like idea that I have that like counteracts it, or like the only idea that kind of goes against utilitarian that I have is like, are we most focused on happiness or like truth? Like you can be as happy as you want and you can be like stuck in illusion and like super ignorant, but at least you're happy, right? Or like, do I want to be like stuck in illusion and like falsehood my entire life just because it like makes me the most happy? Like what if there's like some deeper truth that I would have to like dive into it first and like be super unhappy? And I don't know where I was going with that. Like do I want truth or happiness? I don't know at this moment. It could be either one. Like I haven't really figured out like
Yeah.
what I want out of life. But like I feel like just because you're like focusing on happiness at the end all be all, I don't think that like means that you're gonna arrive at truth by any means. Unless you like take a Buddhist perspective of like the only thing that matters is experience. So therefore the most important thing is experience and like just getting rid of suffering, and that is the truth. Like I don't know, there's different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. It's like, what if uh, happiness and finding a way to happiness is the truth? But I get what you're saying, and I think that certainly periods of unhappiness are, I don't know. Again, I would sort of argue, and this is also a Alan Wattsy kind of idea, but I would argue that sort of like, and again, you were touching up on this too, unnecessary suffering. I think necessary suffering can almost be a form of pleasure within itself, because it's sort of like when you're like that tension of playing a video game or something, or watching a movie. You want that tension, you want that conflict, because then it makes the release of it and the resolution and all that so much more comfort, like so much more pleasurable. So you're increasing the net pleasure with almost like productive discomfort and productive tension. And that's where I think it's sort of, because it's like, if you're banging your head, or if you're banging your hand with a hammer, like I don't think that that would get you at any deeper truth. And if it did, then you could accomplish this, if you were able to accomplish the same metric of pain by, say, doing a lot of push-ups, or by, say, meditating a lot, or doing a lot of yoga, then you're going to have way more assets and the same amount of like pleasure or happiness from those difficult disciplines, and that tension and that discomfort that is almost a form of pleasure within itself. It's like the build up to pleasure pretty much. And that's what I think with truth. And I noticed this with Stoicism, and I'd imagine, and with Socrates as well, is it's sort of like, and especially where you're talking about the external, how we externalize everything. In our society, we think that like, no, so say Socrates, who got killed in Greece and stuff like that, and Marcus Aurelius, who is like probably a stressed out wreck, or should have been a stressed out wreck, because like Germanic tribes were attacking him all the time. He got ill. His son was like a dickhead. His son was just like
Yeah.
messing around all the time. But he maintained that happiness and that composure and that pleasure and this pursuit of truth, because he just derived his pleasure from a different source. And that's where I think any discomfort and truth and stuff like that is like, I would be like, no, like that's a bad way of living. Like I have to live in a comfortable life. I have to have good health. I have to have a good bed. And this also ties to Buddhism, when it's sort of like, but what if the discomfort and relying on myself is an even higher pleasure? Like what if being like, even if it's hard, I'm still going to have this positive attitude of it. I'm still going to, and even the pursuit of truth or something like that, the discipline and the character that I have, I'm going to take my pleasure derived from that instead of from like comfort or external things. And that's like maybe a higher pleasure. And that's where I think even in the pursuit of truth, like the discomfort and the discipline, if you derive pleasure from that, then the discipline and the pain and the struggle becomes enjoyable. It becomes pleasurable. Whereas, and I guess you would also get the fruits, like I'm sure Marcus Aurelius, and this is a Stoic and Buddhist thing as well, is that like once you sort of achieve that happiness and that peace, you're able to enjoy things from the outside. But the argument behind that is that you're really able to enjoy it. It's not, because in Buddhism with the attachment, you're not able to enjoy it because like after you take that first bite of that delicious cake, you're like, oh, I want another bite. And then when you're at your last bite, you're like, oh, but like now I don't have any more cake, or now I ate too much cake. And with like relationships, I don't want this person to leave me. I can't have this person leave me. And then you get all worried and jealous. So it's pointless. You're not even getting the happiness you want from the relationship because you got it like once. And then now you're just like, and you're so stressed out about it, versus Buddhism and Stoicism, where it's like, if you derive that pleasure from the inside, then it's not like you won't receive pleasure from the outside. If you're with someone, then yeah, like you'll have pleasure in that. If you have a delicious piece of cake, yeah, you'll have pleasure in that. But you are able to enjoy it more because it's just like, you're just coming from a state of abundance. It's adding on to what you have. It's not like a deficit where it's like, I don't have enough and this is filling it up. And now I don't have it and I'm back down. It's sort of like, no, you're already up here, and that just raises you up a little bit, but you're good where you're at. And that's where I think that it's sort of even a pursuit of truth. It's just pleasure in a different way. It's pleasure from the inside. And see, even that sort of gets kind of touchy because it's sort of like I feel like a Taoist perspective of like everything is one. It's sort of like your insides and your outsides are the same. So like whatever you're perceiving is colored. Oh, there's actually a good story. If I'm not ranting, or if you don't have anything to say.
Go ahead. No, I'll just go ahead.
It's from this, I can't remember. It's a Rinpoche who's like a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. I can't remember his name. But he was talking about how, I'm sure it's just a normal Buddhist story, but this guy walked into this village, and in front of the village on a hill, it's like a little dirt road and a really simple shack, and a wise man lives there in front of the village. So the traveler's coming in from that side of the village, and he sees this shack. He's like, this guy seems friendly. He was sitting out front. I'm gonna go ask him like how this village is. So he walks up and he sees the old man sitting on the chair just chilling. He's like, hey, like how are the people in this village? And the guy's like, how are the people in your village? Like, how are the people in the village you came from? And the guy's like, oh, they suck, dude. They're jerks. I hate them. They're so mean. And he's like, yeah, those people, they suck. They're mean. You will not like them. And so the travelers walk away. And another traveler comes, talks to the old man, asks him the same question. How are the people in this village? The old man's like, well, how are the people in your village? And like, oh, they're great. I love them. They're super friendly. They're amazing. He's like, yeah, those guys, they're the best. You'll love them. But it's the same village. And he told both of the travelers that. And it's just sort of like whatever ideas and perceptions you place on top of things, that's what they become. And so it's like, and that can apply to anything. If you have very little compared to like the rest of society, but you're happy with that, you're content with that, and you see that as like, well, at least I have something, then you're still way better off in a way better state than the person who has millions of dollars and it's like, no, this is not enough. I'm like, they're torturing themselves and they're living in a state of starvation,
Yeah.
which is weird because they have all the means that we would think to not have that starvation, but they're just starved, like perceptually, maybe, I guess, or um, yeah. You have anything to say to that? Or
Yeah, I think that goes back to the idea of perception is reality. So however, whatever perception, whatever lens you put over reality, that's gonna be your reality. That's gonna be the reality you create. There's no set like this is like reality suck, or like reality is terrible, or like this town is terrible. There's no like, I don't know, that goes into the question of like good and bad though. So like what makes something good and what makes something bad? Well, like if you think that something's good, then you're going to perceive it as good. If you think something's bad, like you can have like the same object. One religion might say that's good, and one belief system might say that's a good thing, and one religion might say that's a bad thing. And however you perceive it, that's how it is. Like it's not good or bad; it just is. And so like that's kind of a core idea in Eastern philosophy as well. It's like there is no good or bad. There's just what is. Like I don't know, with that, when you try to use that, I think the only problem I have with that is when you try to use this idea of that to like inform your actions, you're like, oh, I guess I'm just like, I guess I'm taking drugs. That's what it is. It's not good or bad. Like, I don't know. It's really a complicated topic. I don't know, but I definitely think that it's a really powerful idea to see perception is reality. So like, why would I put a bad perception on reality? Why can't I like be grateful for everything, because that would make me see reality in a more positive light. I don't really know where I was going with that though. Um, we just have our topics list. We could pull up something.
oh well, let me go back and touch upon something real quick.
Yeah,
That's what again I was reading in the book that I was reading on David Hume, or from David Hume right now. One of the things he was going into was morality, the exact same thing you're talking about, like how can we know what's good and bad and the morality and stuff like that. And I think his argument would be is like, and this is I feel a very utilitarian as well, is, and I'm pretty sure he inspired Jeremy Bentham, who's like the father of utilitarianism, or who like really popularized it,
yeah,
main driver behind it. But he was talking about how like pretty much whatever is good is what makes the most people feel the best. So it's sort of like, say, a very warlike society. If war is doing well for those people, then very vicious warlike gods are going to serve them. Versus if it's an agricultural society, then an agricultural god is going to um, like, or an agricultural religion or belief system of like very maybe patient and passive, and certain traits are going to be desirable because they just create the most happiness for everybody.
yeah,
And I guess it's sort of like once we transition, like we just have to adapt to where we are. So if we're in a place where like minimalism and all these things are very beneficial to us because we're like destroying the environment, then stoicism and Buddhism, those are going to be what makes all the most people the most happy. Versus if we were very poor and like living in scarcity and like everyone was starving and dying, then something like, I don't know, hedonism or some religion that enforces taking and getting more and more and more, that would be what makes the most people happy because we're living in a state of such starvation. And yeah. And there's also a story, or were you going to say something?
no, go ahead.
From the what ought to be what is, this is a good Zen story, I think, that illustrates it. Is, I don't know if you've heard it, but there was like a wise Zen farmer kind of guy, and he had a son, and his son, the guy was a pretty strange guy. in the village. But he didn't bother anybody. He was just real chill. But his son was running outside, and he brought back a horse with him. And everyone, yeah.
Oh yeah.
And everyone comes to the house. They're like, "Oh, he's so good." He's like, "Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad." Horse runs away. Like, "Oh, that sucks." Brings back 10 wild horses. They're like, "Oh, that's amazing." He's like, "Oh, maybe it is, maybe it's not." One of the horses breaks the kid's leg, breaks the son's leg. The villagers are like, "Oh, like that's so sad." And the guy's like, "Yeah, maybe it's sad, maybe it's not." And then the soldiers come to recruit, and they can't recruit his son because he has a broken leg. And that's again sort of like there's no way of telling. And that's where I think it also Stoicism and Buddhism, where you're really tapping in from your perception of things and really focusing the perception instead of like trying to take things like on the external, like what you're perceiving, you're turning it on the perceiver instead of the things you perceive. So you're really affecting like the light that shines on everything.
Yeah, I think it helps. All the Stoicism, Buddhism, they all take this central idea of like equanimity. I think that's really powerful too. It's like, and that kind of relates to attachment too. So say like you're super attached to this idea that um, something is good or something is bad. When you don't have that something, it's going to cause suffering. So equanimity is kind of like the opposite of that. So like I think a lot of the core ideas in Buddhism and Stoicism is like not seeing, in order to be most happy and most fulfilled in life, don't chase happiness. Basically, like just um, you're just. I just turned on Siri with that question. Apparently, um,
She wants to know. She wants to know the answer to these questions.
yeah, yeah. I don't know, dude. I've just been having a really hard time like formulating my thoughts, and it's weird.
You think it's because you're like overworked
Yeah,
or like tired?
for sure. That's what work will do to you. And there's a little bit of, I was like, oh, I'm recording a podcast. I have to say the right things, you know. I
Yeah.
can't just like go off on some random tangent. That's like, got to make sure it actually represents what I actually believe, and that's hard to do when you're on the spot, you know.
Yeah, that's what I think, especially with podcasts. And I feel like for beginners, it's much more enjoyable to just like explore ideas and sort of open it up and say dumb things and fall on your face and make mistakes. And then it's like worrying about the refinement process later, because I feel like it's just funner that way. Like it's easier, it's more relaxed, and then I guess it just goes and ties back to like enjoyment. Because if there's all this stress and pressure, then it just makes it not even enjoyable. And so it's like time and effort, like the more time, if you were to do, even if you were to do like, or I mean me, if I was stressed out and I hated like soccer, but I did it every day for 10 years, like I would be really fucking good at soccer. But it's just not, I would probably give up. Like it's, if I hated it and I put all this pressure on myself, I probably just wouldn't play soccer for 10 years.
Yeah,
Versus if I just like was like, okay, I'll suck at soccer, but I like playing it with my friends. And then eventually after 10 years, I'll be like really fucking good. But that's what I'm starting to learn with myself and like really trying to execute these things, because there is this urge to be perfect. And especially in I mean, I'm not going to say our society, but how we're so interconnected now, is we're not even living with like people. We're just living with like metrics. It's like like constantly this competition and constantly this like, oh, this person's such a good podcaster, and like this person's such a good this, like how can I get there, or this person's so buff, like they're so much better than me, or I need to be this, or I need to do this, instead of just like exploring. And because we're so exposed, like we can see, if I were to go on my phone, I could see like 100 amazingly beautiful people right now, like amazingly beautiful people. But if I walked outside, I'm not going to see 100 beautiful people, like perfect models, walking down the street. And
I
so
think
that's where I think what I'm learning is just to be ugly at first,
I
you
think
know?
you brought up a good point. Like we have this pressure on us now that everything's online because like everyone puts out the perfect version of themselves on like social media, and it makes you have these wrong ideas of what reality is actually like. You think that everyone just has this perfect life, and I mean thousands of people have said the same argument that I'm saying right now. But like, so I was like, so what do we do? How can we live a fulfilling life and not give a shit what other people on the internet think of us? And like, how can we, I don't know. I think it goes back to identity too. When your entire identity is like posted online, you're scared of like losing that identity or having someone like criticize that identity because it's uncomfortable for people to say like you're wrong, you believe this, whatever, like to get bad criticisms. And like I don't really know. I think that's when the utilitarian ideas really come in value, are like really valuable too, because like I've definitely like went down that rabbit hole before, and I think I didn't know I was following utilitarian ideas, but I was for like a long amount of time. I was like, if this something makes you unhappy, like why are you chasing it? Like if you're unhappy trying to like chase this like thing that you think will make you happy, like why are you chasing it in the first place? Like I don't know. I think it's just a really delicate balance between utilitarianism turning into hedonism. So it's like if I'm doing whatever makes me the most fulfilled, why don't I just go shoot up some heroin, right? It's like that. I mean, I don't think that's the core idea of it. That's like the core idea of hedonism, but utilitarian sounds like slightly more nuanced than that. That like I'm going to whatever. I think I think a key distinction that I've kind of made in the past couple of years is between pleasure and like fulfillment and purpose. Like
Yeah.
you feel like super, I can have like a bunch of passion for something. I can have some topic that I'm so passionate about, and that's almost a better feeling than just like raw hollow pleasure. Like
Yeah.
watching Netflix, it might be pleasurable. Doing some drugs, it might be pleasurable, but it's like hollow. It just makes you feel terrible. Like it might feel good, but then once it's done, you just feel absolutely terrible about yourself. So I think it's like finding that balance between, all right, I'm not like forcing myself to like this thing and like suffering because of it. And I'm also like, I'm doing something because I enjoy it, but that's not the only reason I do it. I also do it because like fulfills some deeper purpose, some deeper meaning within me, rather than just I'm gonna do whatever makes me happiest. So therefore, hedonism.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think even returning to like say the hedonism and stuff like that, there's this like notion of compounding. I think even Einstein said that like compounding is one of the greatest mathematical like achievements and discoveries ever. And so what compounding is, it's pretty much just like exponential growth. So it's sort of like it just keeps building on top of itself. And that's where I think again even if you look at Jeremy Bentham's like metrics for pleasure, there's like he tries to make it more mathematical. So it's like you have to measure it by the duration, you have to measure it by the consequences, you have to measure it by these certain amount of things. So I feel like a utilitarian argument against heroin would be that it's not worth it because the pain that it creates and the duration that it has is too short and the consequences are too great that it cancels out. So the pleasure is directly canceled out by the suffering.
And you
And
probably end up having a lot more pain in the end than pleasure.
yeah,
You
yeah,
have this huge hit of pleasure, but then you have this huge, like, this huge amount of pain for a lot longer a period of time than you may have had that pleasure. So
Yeah.
overall, you have net negative. You have a lot more pain than you have pleasure. Whereas if you do something that's kind of painful because it's like helping you grow over time, that's going to turn into a lot more pleasure than it is pain.
Yeah. It yeah, I guess, and this sort of ties back to like the evolutionary um, reason for why humans would do things. And I think this makes sense as well, is it's sort of like there's no denying that cheap pleasure and gratification definitely has a place within like the human mind and with animals' minds, because that makes sense. Like normally shit would be really hard to get, you know?
Yeah.
Normally having KFC would be really like chickens do not want you to eat them. Wild chickens do not want you to catch them. And that you have to go and track them. You have to do all these things. So now that we have such easy access, that kind of hijacks us. But there's also this other pleasure, because again, like it would be sort of like um, wrong to say like that humans don't enjoy these like cheap gratification things, and it would be wrong to say that those are always bad, because I think like again any blanket statement is
Yeah.
not true, you know.
Yeah.
And there's utility, like there's and even certain drugs that we consider bad, like heroin is an opiate, so that can help people under certain like very specific circumstances. Like people take um like laughing gas, nitrous oxide, and people like there's certain uses for things, but there's also this like I think capacity in the human mind that really appreciates growth, and there's this huge pleasure derived from that, because like the more capable you are as an animal, of course your brain and the evolution is gonna want you to drive towards that. So there's also that pleasure as well, and I think it's sort of like living in this. I guess this is like a naturalistic theory of philosophy,
Yeah.
is trying to live as much according to our nature as possible. So taking and then learning to balance everything. And yeah, there's also this interesting thing too about baseline, like baseline dopamine, and like I guess baseline happiness.
Yeah.
And the more you give in to like cheap pleasures, the lower your baseline happiness is, versus the more simply and like renunciate, I guess, you live. And this is the this is do you know who Diogenes is?
No.
Oh, you gotta look, bro. You'll love him. He's I forget what, he was a cynic. He was a Greek cynic, and this dude was fucking crazy, bro. He like would jerk off in public. All he had was like a big bowl, like these huge bin that he lived in, and all he had was a bowl, right? That's the only thing he had to his name. And then one day he was walking by a river and he saw a kid drinking water with his hands. He's like, oh fuck, like I have way too much stuff. And then he got rid of the bowl, so he didn't have the bowl anymore. And but his thing was that like he would torture himself. He would stay in the sun, burn his skin, walk on hot sand, live with nothing, like starve. He's totally socially isolated. But it's sort of like his baseline happiness was so low that even just like a breeze was ecstasy. It was just like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And but yeah, dude, he was a really interesting guy. And there's even a story about him and Alexander the Great. Like Alexander the Great, like that's not somebody you talk shit to, you know.
Yeah.
And he was walking by Diogenes, and he's standing over Diogenes, and he's like, "Do you know who I am?" or something like that. And Diogenes is like, "Yeah, like I know who you are." And he's like, "Who am I?" And he's like, "You're the guy who's standing in my sun. You know, like get the fuck out of the way. You're blocking the sun." And he just didn't care. But it just goes back to that, trying to live like, and that's like I guess the argument behind renunciate life and like devotees and monks, is that you take away all this like cheapness, so that all you like everything you get is quality. It's just like a nice picturesque like sunset. Like normally now it'd be like, oh yeah, and take a picture and then we're done.
Yeah.
Versus them, they're just like, it's the same as like smoking weed or watching a Netflix movie. For us, it's the same amount of pleasure, but they can tap into it so much more easily.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. Like, I don't know. I think that goes into the idea of how distracted and how easy access we have to pleasure in the modern world. And that even if you just like train yourself just a little bit, you can get a lot of results from just like not giving into pleasure every second of the day. So like every second, most people will just check their phone, what's on my phone, what's on Twitter, or like they don't have one free moment to be with their thoughts. In spending time in solitude with just your thoughts, it kind of trains you to like be okay with nothing and to be like, they say there's this one quote that said, um it said the only way to be happy, like you can't be happy unless you can sit in an empty room for 30 minutes and be perfectly content. If like
Hmm.
basically as soon as you like, the reason that we're not happy is because we have so many addictions. We're addicted to so many things that if we just do nothing, we feel like compelled to do all these different things, and it makes us miserable because we're just like addicted to social media, to junk food, to all this stuff. The guy that you were talking about, he had no addictions whatsoever. He was completely content with absolutely nothing. And I think that's kind of the core idea I took from it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's crazy too, especially in our society. It's like, and it's so flipped. It's like the person in the old days, the hunter who could get the most, the person who was the strongest, the person who could do this. Those people were like revered and amazed. Like, if you were able to get all this stuff, then yeah, like that was a good thing. But
Yeah,
now it's like the person who can sort of turn away from that and like not care about that stuff, that's the person who has like the most power in today's society, is to not be like attached to so many things, I guess. And I guess it just depends on like the quality and like the impact of your ideas, because Martin Luther King Jr., I'm sure he had a lot of pleasure. I'm sure there was a lot of stress and a lot of struggle from his fight, but it just, I can't imagine that he didn't have this insane amount of pleasure and insane amount of like, and he deserves it because what he did was amazing, but it's just like this stoic thing of this Marcus Aurelius, like touched deep well of happiness and peace. Um, but what he did was like impactful, versus now we're just like, like, what are we fighting for anymore? You know, we're fighting for like social media. It's just for people to like us, for people to tell us how great we are. And instead of like, I guess, happiness or peace or
yeah, I agree. And I think that, I don't know, this kind of goes into a different topic. Like, I think one idea that I've really been contemplating a lot is like how much. So there's this really interesting idea, right? So you've heard of 1984, the book, like George Orwell. Basically, the idea that in the future, in some dystopian future, there's going to be a government that controls your every move and watches every single thing you do, and you will have no. They'll be in a perpetual state of war, so they'll have complete and utter control over you, and they get rid of all the books, so you don't have any books, you can't read and educate yourself, and that got a lot of popularity. But what most people don't know is that there was another book called Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and it
oh yeah, yeah. I started reading it.
and a lot of and I think that it embodies our modern society a lot better than like thinking that we're going to be controlled by some authoritarian state. It's the idea that we're given so much pleasure that we don't even have the urge to think for ourselves and to like to do the things necessary to like have autonomy and have self-reliance. So like I feel like that's the state of the world we're in today because you have 24/7 pleasure. You got in your pocket, you have a phone that can give you pleasure anytime you want. We have pleasure in whatever food you eat, it's probably going to be like a pleasurable type of food. Like we're given everything pleasurable so that like why would we do something that's like extremely hard to do, like read some massive book from like a classic novel or something, or why would we like take go through the uncomfortable process of thinking for ourselves rather than just whatever some idea our culture gives us. They're like, ah, that's fine, it doesn't matter, I got so much pleasure. Like why would I don't know. I think that's the detriment of our modern world that's filled with pleasure in my eyes.
Yeah, yeah. There's uh we're getting so like soft now that the mass is like the, and I guess this would be an argument. I feel like, I mean, I don't, I haven't read his books, but Thoreau was sort of touching on upon, and I think a lot of like decentralized propositions for government touch on, is that we're getting so soft that like the government could just control us. The government could just because, or not, maybe it can't right now, but it's getting to a point where it will be able to, because it's just like, it's the slave who like enjoys being a slave, or the person who is trapped, who enjoys being trapped, that is most viciously caught in it.
Or
And I guess that's the, what are you gonna say?
the person that's a slave because they don't know that they're a slave. How about that one?
Yeah. Yeah, because they think like, oh, I'm achieving this, I'm doing all these things, I'm doing this. But meanwhile, the person's in the back playing the strings, like, yeah, that's what you think. You think you're doing this for you. You think you're getting something from this. And um, that's, I guess, the argument for like having smaller communities. And again, I feel like that's just, and that's what most interested me, to be honest, in being a monk as well, is just having that tight knit community. But I guess there's other ways of doing it, because you can join like there's like communities that live together and stuff. And even if you look at the happiest countries, like countries like Sweden, like if you look at the population, it's a dispersed population of small villages that are super tight knit together over like large swaths of land, versus America, where it's like super constant, like a place like New York. I couldn't imagine living there. And
Yeah.
it's just, and there's so much like here there's so much competition, versus in a small village or like a small tribe or something like that. It's we all rise together. Like it's like, no, like it's not I'm catching food and I'm eating for me. It's I'm feeding all you guys because you make my work, like you make my house, you make my, you make the medicine, you know about that stuff.
Yeah.
Versus now we're just like, no, I'll go to the doctor, I'll call this person, or I'll do this. They have to. I have this money. I'll just get all this for me. Um, Instead of really having to rely. Because I guess it's sort of like, I guess it's a balance, because complete self-reliance, I just don't think, because as humans in the wild and stuff, in our society, like in Americans, well, I would say even now, a human cannot be alone. Like if you don't have sponsors, if you don't have people helping you, like even if you write a book, you still need the people to buy your book, even if you do it alone. Even if you're alone on YouTube, you still need people to pay you. You still need the banks to enforce the concept of money for you. You still need them to hold your money. We're still super dependent on people, versus having someone that like we can see and like believe and touch and love, and we're giving and receiving equally. It's sort of like I'm giving you a chicken, or we're both eating a chicken, and now we're both healthy and like we have medicine and we both have these things, versus being so isolated from each other, and all you are is a number to me, all you are is a label to me, all you are is doctor to me. You're not like a person, a full formed human being, which is, I feel like, in a small community, people would be to each other. And yeah, because we're not tigers, you know. A tiger could probably live on its, well, a tiger could live on its own. A human being, I don't think we don't got the skills for that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really valuable idea. Like the idea that I think that's just like egalitarianism and like thinking that everyone. Actually, I don't even know. I don't. Maybe it's not that, but I think. Yeah, I think it gets we're getting into like the really political realm. Like, how do we function as a society? Who should control us? Whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I think my favorite quote relating to like our current political system. Get ready for your mind to be blown, right? It says
All right.
democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. So basically, like democracy is not a good form of government, but it's better than every other shitty
Uh,
form of government that we've ever tried. You know, so like to
yeah.
think that our form of government right now is perfect is like that's not a good way to think about it. It's just the thinking about it as like we've tried communism, we've tried anarchism, we've tried whatever. Like we've tried so many different types of government, and that democracy is the one that works the best, but that does not mean that it's the best form of government. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, and it all just ties back to, like, if it's battle tested, and if it's like, if it really takes to the stand, then maybe it'll work. But when push comes to shove, is it gonna topple or is it not? That's the only question it's gonna matter.
it all sounds good on paper until you actually do it.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm gonna stop this episode. It's because we already done like 2 hours. So,
All right, for sure.